I wanted to start today with an exercise. I would like you to imagine that the day you were born, your entire life had already been planned out for you. In fact, someone else had even decided when you would be born. They decided who your parents would be, and they decided for your parents to conceive you. They decided where you would live and how old you would be when you were taken from your mother. They decided how you would be housed and how you would be treated. They decided what you would eat and when and how much you would have to drink. They decided when you would go to the bathroom and where. They decided if you got to have any friends. And they decided exactly when and how you would die. This may sound like something happening in a faraway land or the distant past, a remnant of human slavery. If someone did this to people today, the world would erupt in justified outrage. But the thing is, most people today in this world are playing the role of the monster every single day of every single year. The only thing that's different from our imagined scenario and the everyday reality is the identity of the victims. When we replace the human victim with non-human animals, suddenly it's no longer slavery, it's lawful ownership. It's no longer criminal, it's protected by law. It's no longer the works of a monster, it's good business practice. And it's no longer sadism. It's what needs to be done to feed the world. But to the animals whose eyes you just so briefly looked through, they don't care what species they are. They just know that they are terrified, confined, abused, beaten, raped, separated from their family, and murdered. And they have a desire for life and love as strong as any of us in this room. All you have to do is go to a slaughterhouse, watch them fight to escape. They know what is coming and they want no part of it. This is not a contract that they've entered into willingly. As Yiddish author, Holocaust survivor, and Nobel laureate Isaac Bashevis Singer wrote, what do they know? All of these scholars, all of the philosophers, all the leaders of the world, they have convinced themselves that man, the greatest transgressor of all the species, is the crown of creation, that all other creatures were created merely to provide him with food and pelts, to be tormented and executed. In relation to the animals, all humans are Nazis. For the animals, it is an eternal Treblinka. My name is Emily Moran Barwick. I am an animal liberation activist, an artist, an educator, and a vegan. I created the YouTube channel and accompanying website BiteSizeVegan, where I educate people about veganism through an array of video styles and subject matters. I want to preface this talk by saying that I'm going to be transparent with you, and I'll even tell you when I don't know something. For anyone unfamiliar with the term vegan, vegans do not eat, wear, or use anything that came from someone else's body. We don't eat meat, drink milk, or eat cheese. We don't consume eggs or honey. We don't wear leather, wool, silk, or down. We don't use products that were tested on animals or contain byproducts from their slaughter. We don't attend circuses, zoos, bullfights, or any other event that exploits living beings for our momentary pleasure. Now, you may think this is an extreme way of life. Many people do. But I'd like you to return to how you feel putting yourself in the place of the animals. And in all honesty, seeing what they are going through for a sandwich, a beverage, a purse, a coat, or any human pleasure, is eating plant-based foods instead of paying people to perform sadistic acts for us really the extreme choice. If this feels heavy-handed, please stay open-minded throughout this talk. I will be addressing issues other than ethics, as well as including small and local farming and issues specific to Portugal. Believe it or not, I'm not here to force anyone to be vegan. I don't pretend to have that power, and no one makes any lasting change through force. I'm here to show you what's really going on, every second of every day, all around the world, behind closed doors. I'm here to give you the opportunity to live the values that you already have. Most people don't want to cause the suffering and death of innocent beings. There's a reason that we pay others to slaughter our animals for us. Most people don't want to destroy the earth for future generations. Most people want to feed the hungry people of our world. And most people want to live a long and healthy life. Far from being extreme, veganism is simply living in a way that's already in line with these common values. Before we get into specifics, I thought I would tell you a little about my own vegan story. It's pretty brief. My mother tells me that I started refusing to eat meat when I was around 4 years old, that if I could tell it had ever been alive, I refused to eat it. Now, this is pretty typical of children. Activist Gary Yourofsky has often said that if you put an apple and a lamb or a calf or a chicken into a child's playpen, they're going to eat the apple and they're going to play with the animal. We have to be taught to consume their bodies and their secretions. You don't ever see babies pouncing on the family dog and ripping through their fur and flesh. We eat our animals cut up, cooked, spiced, glazed, and looking nothing like they did when they were alive. Most people consider themselves animal lovers. In America, we love our dogs and our cats and our other pets, and we eat our cows and pigs and chickens. Of course, which species is acceptable for consumption depends on where you are. One country will eat dogs, one holds cows sacred, one consumes pigs, and another shuns their consumption. The fact that who is and is not acceptable to kill varies so greatly by geography highlights the completely arbitrary nature of our distinctions. Before we start, I'm going to throw out some numbers to help us grasp the enormity of what we're talking about, because it's really difficult for us to wrap our heads around incredibly large numbers. We're going to do a quick comparison. And I do want to make a note that when I'm using the terms million, billion, and trillion, I'm referring to the short scale system, which differs from the long scale. So 1 million seconds is 12 days, but 1 billion seconds is 31 years, and 1 trillion seconds is 31,688 years. So now that we've got a bit of a scale to work with, here are some figures. We're going to see what they apply to. So the number of people who died in all wars in human history is 1 billion. And the number of chickens killed in the United States in 2013 alone is 8.6 billion. The number of people starving in the world is 795 million. And the number of people we could feed with the food that we are currently growing is 10 billion. We're going to talk more about where that's going soon. The number of liters of water for fracking in the United States, and what that is, it's the water-based form of drilling that is very controversial with environmentalists, is 265 to 530 billion. The number of liters for animal agriculture in America alone is 129 to 288 trillion. So remembering the scale, that is a huge difference. We're going to be looking at global numbers as well. The percentage of all greenhouse gas emissions from global transport, that's every car, train, automobile, is 13%. So of course, the percentage of global greenhouse gas emissions from animal agriculture is 51%. The number of humans that have ever existed in the entire history of our species is 107.6 billion, leaving the number of fish we kill globally every year at 2.8 trillion. As we can see, the impact of what we put in our mouths reaches far beyond our stomachs. As a species, we are killing the planet, trillions of other beings, and ourselves. While eating animals may not be the cause of all of the evils in the world, it is certainly the most preventable and the one that revolves around individual choice. That's an incredible opportunity for every single person to take their own action. You don't need to form a union. You don't need to petition the government. You just stop eating animals and stop using them. It's perhaps the single most impactful decision that one person can make. This is why it's so vital to know the truth, so that you can make decisions with facts, not preconceptions or cultural half-truths. We all have them, and I'm not here to take away culture or take away religion or political affiliation. Veganism isn't about changing who you are. It's about changing what you do. Vegans come from as many backgrounds, races, creeds, cultures, socioeconomic statuses, and religions as non-vegans. All that unites us as a group is the refusal to participate in exploitation. I'm not saying this as a badge of superiority. Like most people in this world, most vegans were raised in families and cultures where eating animals is the social norm. Many cultures have very strong ties to the meat, dairy, and egg dishes of their region. We are taught that it's just a part of life, that we have to kill animals to survive, that we need the nutrition from their flesh and their secretions. We're taught that they were put here for us. Maybe we're taught that they don't feel or that they're stupid. Undoing a lifelong belief is no easy task. But in order to make a decision, in order to look ourselves in the mirror and ask if we are living the values that we purport to have, we must know the truth. We must educate ourselves about what is really going on, not rely on what we've been told. We must make decisions based on facts and not fantasy. So we're going to dive into some facts. I'll start with the environmental aspects of animal agriculture. I have a video on my channel that goes through a lot of numbers and figures, but in short, we cannot sustain the way that we are eating. Despite what we learned from environmental protection agencies, showering shorter, recycling paper, and riding our bikes instead of driving is not going to save the planet. Animal agriculture is the leading cause of climate change. As we saw, it's responsible for up to 51% of greenhouse gas emissions, compared to the 13% of all global transportation. It uses a third of the Earth's fresh water, up to 45% of Earth's land, and it's responsible for 91% of Amazon rainforest destruction, with 40 to 80 acres cleared every second. It's also a leading cause of species extinction, ocean dead zones, and habitat destruction. The efforts that we make to recycle paper, take shorter showers, are rather insignificant in comparison. Accounting for variation in production system, the global average water footprint for a single kilogram of beef is 15,415 liters. If we add emissions, this one animal product alone is an environmental disaster. Although beef accounts for only about 30% of the industrial world's meat consumption, it contributes 78% of meat's greenhouse gas emissions. Methane, for example, which is produced by cows in alarming quantities, is 25 to 100 times more destructive than carbon dioxide and has 86 times the global warming power. Additionally, livestock as a whole is responsible for 65% of all emissions of nitrous oxide. That's a greenhouse gas that is 296 times more destructive than carbon dioxide, and which stays in the atmosphere for 150 years. It's not just cows, though, that have such an adverse effect on the environment. They are certainly one of the greatest defenders of all animal agriculture, but by no means the only one. Pig farming creates what are called lagoons. They are lakes of stagnant feces and urine. The ammonia emissions from these lagoons creates what's called fine particle pollution in the air. It poses a serious health threat to neighboring communities, including decreased lung function, cardiovascular ailments, and even premature death. The waste contains disease-causing pathogens, increases antibiotic resistance, and can seep into the groundwater and contaminate local supplies. If we're looking again at water usage, a single kilogram of eggs has a global average water footprint of 3,265 liters, meaning a single egg, 60-gram egg, takes about 200 liters to produce. The average footprint for milk is 1,020 liters for a kilogram, and dairy cattle account for 19% of the total water footprint of all animal production in the world. Layer hens account for 7% of this footprint, and beef cattle account for a full third. We can see here that without fail, those products with the smallest water footprints based on weight are plant-based. But weight doesn't necessarily mean sustenance. Still, global averages show that when viewed from a caloric standpoint, the water footprint for animal products is larger than for crop products, with the average footprint per calorie of beef being 20 times larger than for cereals and starch roots. And with protein being the greatest nutrition concern for people considering veganism, it's worth noting that the water footprint per gram of protein for milk, eggs, and chicken is 1.5 times larger than for pulses, with beefs being 6 times larger, which led to the conclusion that it is more efficient to obtain calories, protein, and fat through plant crop products than animal products. But we don't really need studies to tell us that eating animals requires more energy and creates more waste than eating plants. How could it not? Eating animals is incredibly inefficient. We're filtering our nutrients, our water, our resources through somebody else's body. Globally, we're feeding close to 40% of our grains to our food animals. How can that not be worse for the environment than simply eating the plants ourselves? The United States alone could feed 800 million people with the grain that we're feeding to our livestock. That's more than the estimated 795 million people going hungry in the world today. 98% of the massive water footprint that we just learned about with animal agriculture goes to feeding crops to the animals that we eat. Now, I'm not suggesting that a global shift to veganism will automatically result in the proper redistribution of our crops, but it's the only way that we can have the food to feed everyone, especially if we don't want factory farming and industrial agriculture. When it comes to this environmental resource toll, many people point to small farms, sustainable practices like grass-fed beef or free-range eggs. The thing is, we don't have the land. There's simply no land for the number of animals that we eat every year. The amount of land that it takes to produce 37,000 pounds of plant food will only yield 375 pounds of meat. The land required to feed one vegan for 1 year is 0.07 hectares. It takes 3 times as much for a vegetarian, someone who consumes dairy and eggs but no meat, and 18 times as much for meat eaters. You can grow 15 times more protein on any given area of land with plants versus animals. On top of all that, studies show that pasture-raised cows emit 40 to 60% more greenhouse gases than grain-fed. I could talk about the environmental cost of animal agriculture all day, and we would just be scratching the surface. I did want to speak briefly to fishing and ocean health before moving on. I published a 17-minute video report encompassing the most recent research on the state of our oceans, so I'll try to summarize some of the main takeaways. Whether you eat fish and marine life or not, this matter impacts all of us. The ocean, or rather the phytoplankton in the ocean, provides somewhere between 50 and 80% of our oxygen, and the ocean's ecosystems store carbon in massive quantities. Since we tend to go for the biggest fish first, only 10% of predatory fish species remain, which could leave the unchecked species to feed on the ocean's vegetation, releasing the stored carbon. Releasing just 1% of this stored carbon will be equivalent to the annual greenhouse gas emissions of Australia. We pull 90 to 100 million tons of fish from the oceans each year, with some sources even estimating 150 million tons. there is no way for marine populations to repopulate themselves. And our industrial fishing methods are incredibly inefficient, with some operations throwing 98% of their catches overboard dead because they weren't the intended species. As I said earlier, land-based animal agriculture is the leading cause of ocean dead zones, which are the areas in the ocean that are starved of oxygen, so much so that marine life suffocates and dies. And people think veganism is extreme, when humanity is decimating habitats, consuming land and resources, polluting the oceans, destroying the rainforest, driving species after species into extinction, feeding plants that we could eat to animals, and feeding animals to other animals that aren't supposed to eat animals, all that's that we can eventually eat the animals ourselves, and all the time leaving an astronomical wake of destruction behind us. But of course, as a consumer, we don't see the trail. We see the pretty packages and the sleek advertising. We find comfort in the fact that most people eat the way that we do, that most people don't seem to be concerned. And we continue to believe that this is the way it's supposed to be. But here's the takeaway from the environmental reasoning for veganism. We have reached a point beyond personal choice, beyond you eat how you want to eat and I'll eat how I want to eat. This is a global crisis, and it's not about you and it's not about me anymore. We say that the children are our future, but what future can they have when we're eating the planet to death? The world cannot sustain meat, dairy, and egg production. It simply can't. We've seen that grass-fed beef consumes more land and produces more greenhouse gases than industrial and factory farms. But a lesser discussed aspect of this idyllic farming method is consumer cost. A study that interviewed dairy farmers in the north of Portugal asked them to comment upon a picture of pasture-raised cows and cows living indoors. The farmers agreed that the pasture dairy cows were ideal, but not feasible. Some stated that they wouldn't have the land, as we discussed, while others brought up the point that while consumers would prefer pasture-raised, they wouldn't want to pay the extra cost. One quote from a farmer sums it up perfectly. He said that it isn't about telling people what is it that you want. It's about how much are you willing to pay. Consumers want their animal products to be humane. They want them to be environmentally friendly, and they want them to be affordable. But this is not possible. And farmers' primary motivation, just like the larger agribusiness, is money. Industrial agriculture and factory farming are taking over for a reason. Intensive farming makes production faster, larger, and cheaper. It also, by default, makes the lives and deaths of the animals even more horrific. However, I would like to emphasize that from an ethical perspective, the type of farming, whether small and family-run or industrial factory farm, is not important. For the cow, the pig, the chicken, the duck, turkey, or the lamb or sheep, they don't know the name of the company or the person enslaving them. They don't know what size the farm is or what country. They are just as robbed of their rights and their lives, regardless of the location or the farm size or the country. Let's go over some of the industry standards for animals. Some of the details may vary from country to country, even location to location, but not as much as you may think. Farm animals are usually labeled or marked in some way so that farmers can keep track and clearly mark ownership. They may be branded with hot irons or have their skin frozen off. They may be tattooed and tagged, or even have electronic transponders injected under their skin or strapped to their neck or ankle. The important thing is that they are clearly property, and they are treated as such. We breed and manipulate their genetics to grow bigger and faster until every animal that we eat is still a baby. If their bodies don't conform to their owner's desires, they are altered at will. Baby pigs have their teeth cut out, their ears notched, their tails cut off, and their testicles ripped out, all without anesthetic. Chickens, turkeys, and other birds in the meat and egg industries have their sensitive beaks cut or seared off. Cows have their horns cut or burned off and are also castrated without anesthetic. We say that this is for their own good, because if we don't clip their teeth or cut their beak or slice their tails, they'll attack and chew on each other. Of course, we fail to mention that these behaviors are a stress response to overly confined and insanity-inducing conditions. If we don't put them in these conditions, they wouldn't react the way that they do. One of the most heartbreaking industries is dairy. Most of us grow up thinking that cows are made to be milked. We may even think that they have a constant supply, an anomaly among mammals. But cows are just like us. They carry their baby for 9 months, just like we do. They lactate to feed their baby, just like we do. And then they stop, just like we do. So to get a cow's milk, cows have to be repeatedly inseminated, which is a nice word for raped. The restraining apparatus used to secure the cows is literally referred to in the dairy industry, at least in America, as a rape rack. So this isn't a term that's dreamed up by vegan activists. Once a cow gives birth, her baby is taken away from her. And if he is male, he is sent to a veal farm. He is tied down, unable to move, or locked in a cage where he cannot turn around, before being slaughtered when he is only a few weeks old. Veal wouldn't exist without dairy. Every cup of yogurt, every scoop of ice cream, every bite of cheese is tied to the death of these baby calves. And mother cows experience a horrific agony all their own. Cows bond intensely with their calves, and mothers will cry for days when they are taken. A former cattle rancher turned vegan when she witnessed her mother cows chasing the trailer as it took their children away. She says they cried for days and they only stopped when they lost their voices. This is not anthropomorphizing. This is a mother's grief, and it's utterly heartbreaking to watch. After being forced into pregnancy after pregnancy, having their children violently taken away, and getting infections from frequent milkings, the mothers of the dairy industry, their bodies finally give out when they're around 4 or 5 years old, and they're termed spent. Allowed to live free of this exploitation, cows can live for over 20 years. But when their bodies give out, decades before their time, dairy cows are slaughtered for cheap meat and pet food. On a lighter note, it's rather absurd when you think about it. What made a human one day decide that it was time to return to nursing? And why did they choose a cow? With all the mammals, they decided that a 700 plus kilogram animal was the one to nestle up to. It's a bizarre concept when we look at it from outside of our social customs. But this is what humans have done. We've made commodities or products out of individuals. When we've sufficiently altered them to fit our needs, we shove them into cramped cages or sheds, we deprive them of sunlight, we manipulate temperature and light cycles so that they lay more eggs, or we keep them confined and unable to move so that their flesh is more tender. And if they don't serve a purpose or make a profit, we throw them away like garbage. Nowhere is this more evident than in the egg industry. Chickens bred for laying eggs are different than those bred for their flesh. This is another human-created specialization. Because of this, the egg industry produces millions, if not a billion, unwanted male baby chicks every year. Males can't lay eggs, so they're of no use. To dispose of, as they say, these baby chicks, they are either painfully gassed, slowly suffocated in plastic bags, or they are ground up alive. We're talking about the cute, fluffy little baby chicks. This is common practice in the industry, and the European Union specifies maceration, meaning the live grinding, as the method of dispatching of chicks. They have to be less than 72 hours old, not even 3 days of life. Now, as far as I can tell, the Durovo Group is the largest egg producer in Portugal. The Pombal factory processes about 1.8 million eggs a day, and the Mears factory has a 3 million egg a day capacity. Egg-laying hens are often kept in battery cages with barely enough room to move. We've bred them to produce eggs at an unnatural quantities, and we alter their environment to promote even higher production. Hens lose vital nutrients every time their body makes an egg. These high production numbers, coupled with the cramped and filthy conditions, leads to early mortality rates. But luckily, all of the female chicks whose brothers were thrown into the grinders are there to take their mother's place. Of course, nowadays we have free-range and cage-free facilities, but in truth, they aren't much better. Birds are cramped into sheds rather than tiny cages. The Council of the European Union set a directive in 1999 that banned all barren battery cages be replaced by colony cages by 2012. In 2012, France and 8 other countries, including Portugal, told the European Commission that their farmers would not be ready to fully implement the new rules. Another 4 countries said they were unlikely to be ready. The new regulation allows 750 square centimeters of area per hen, compared to the 550 centimeters in the conventional battery cages. They had over 12 years to add 200 square centimeters. Humane regulation does not equal humane conditions. Not only because of the industry's non-compliance, but because there's no way to keep someone captive against their will in a kind manner. There's no way to take what isn't ours humanely. And there certainly is no way to humanely slaughter. Even the welfare of animals in the industry is in the interest of humans. The Portuguese dairy farmers in the study I mentioned did express that animal welfare was important. However, this was often expressed in terms such as animals which are not faring well are not producing well. The importance of good animal health and welfare was also mentioned in the context of the farmer's own situation, with reference to the fact that problems with animal health and animal welfare make the farmer's life difficult. As the farmers said, while they recognize that pasture raising their herds is more of an ideal environment, they cannot do so and make a profit. And profit is always above the safety, comfort, and even the very lives of these animals. This is what happens when we make products out of living beings. Money takes priority over life. You may be thinking that sure, large-scale animal agriculture is a problem, and no one wants animals to suffer the way that they do in all of the undercover videos that we see. But that's in America, right? Or China, or some faraway land. It's not here. Here, we have higher standards, better regulations. Well, we're going to take a little look at the regulations. We've already gone over the laying hen accommodations. The EU also has stipulations for slaughter and supplemental studies, like the one that found that over 2.1 million of the 25 million cows slaughtered in the European Union in 2012 were killed without any form of stunning. If you read through enough of the Council regulations from the EU, there's a level of absurdity with how much time, energy, detail, government money, and paperwork goes into finding just the right way to kill. And you only have to make it to the end of a paragraph before you find exclusions. Very often, poultry, rabbits, and hares are excluded. If you're killing an animal yourself for private consumption or a cultural event or a tradition, there are exclusions. Fish aren't even considered. Reptiles and amphibians are excluded. If it's a religious killing, no stunning is required and regulations are relaxed. If the slaughterhouse is a small operation, it's not required to have an animal welfare officer. The document recognizes the need to phase out the use of carbon dioxide for pigs and water bath stunners for poultry. But it doesn't include this because they found that the impact assessment revealed that such recommendations were not economically viable at present in the EU. Again, money prevails. You can pore through this document for all of the legal speak on how to make taking the life of a living being acceptable. I mean, it really is absurd when we step back and we think about it. Do we have manuals on how to humanely rape, or how to compassionately kidnap, or how to ethically rob? Of course not, because these are oxymorons. They cannot coexist. But when it comes to killing animals, we will bend over backwards and create massive paper trails of regulations to feel good about what we are doing. Again, I must ask, is veganism really the extreme choice here? Incredibly, the regulation states that there is sufficient scientific evidence to demonstrate that vertebrate animals are sentient beings, and that many killing methods are painful for animals. Killing may induce pain, distress, fear, or other forms of suffering in animals, even under the best available technical conditions. And later, other stunning methods may not lead to death, and the animals may recover their consciousness or sensibility during the subsequent painful procedures. They're sure to quickly add that stunning methods which do not result in instantaneous death will be hereinafter referred to as simple stunning, which is a lovely euphemism. Now, I'm not trying to pick on Portugal or the European Union. My country has nothing to be proud of. We are just as cruel, just as convoluted in our attempts at justification. We just do it on a much larger scale. America provides many countries with an easy dismissal when confronted with undercover footage. I've heard that only happens in America more times than I can count. But I'll tell you something. Americans do the exact same thing. Pointing the finger is a defensive tactic that crosses cultures and creeds. It unites us in our humanity, in a way. It's either an isolated incident, or in some other country, or from decades ago before there were better regulations. It's never what is happening right now in our own backyards. I'm going to play a video now. Portions of the footage where the location is known will be labeled as such, but it doesn't mean that the same thing isn't happening in other parts of the world. I trimmed down hours of footage into a 4-minute clip. I also apologize, parts of the video will be low resolution, as that's how the footage was presented. It will not be pleasant, but I'd implore you to watch anyways. You can't make an informed decision without having all of the facts. If you feel that you must turn away, I would simply ask you to think on the question: if I can't watch the process, do I have a right to eat the product? In my years of being vegan and speaking with many, many non-vegans, I have yet to ever hear one reason that even comes close to justifying putting sentient beings through what we just saw. Not one. You cannot watch that and say that the animals we kill for food don't know any better, that they die peacefully and humanely. They can sense the fear, they can smell the blood, and they fight. They fight to the end. And you can't say that it's happening in some faraway place because it's happening all over the world. The CO2 chambers that you saw, those were the medieval devices lowering pigs to an extraordinarily painful death of burning from the inside out. That is seen as the most humane method of slaughtering pigs. And it's used here in Portugal. The pig we saw in the traditional backyard slaughter here in Portugal wanted to live just as badly as those in the factory farms. Our traditions do not alleviate their suffering, and our customs do not dictate the value of someone else's life. Traditions can be wrong, and customs can be cruel. There are many atrocities in the history of humanity that we now look upon with disgust and disbelief at what used to be commonplace. Whether it's bullfighting or the circus, animals are not here to be enslaved, abused, and tortured for our entertainment. The most absurd thing of all of this is that we don't even need to eat animals. We benefit in every conceivable way from not eating them. I didn't get into depth in the health aspects of veganism, but you can find resources on the page that I'll be leaving with you, along with citations to all of the studies and statistics that I've referenced. The good news is that being vegan doesn't mean giving up taste or even giving up your favorite foods. These days, there exist vegan alternatives to virtually every meat, cheese, dairy creation, even eggs. And you can find recipes online for making your own versions if the ready-made alternatives aren't available in your area or are too expensive. Veganism is the most powerful tool that we have for saving our planet, for improving our health when we eat health consciously, and for regaining our compassion, for becoming the people we believe ourselves to be, good people. And good people don't destroy the planet, leaving our children futureless. Good people don't kill newborn babies in grinders. Good people don't tear day-old babies away from their mothers. Good people don't torture, rape, and murder. And yet good people everywhere are doing all of these things with every bite. Our treatment of animals is a global issue. Cruelty knows no culture. It respects no country's borders. But neither does compassion. We have the power to stop all of this. That's the beauty of veganism. It happens on an individual basis. You are the change. You decide what goes into your body. You decide whether you want to continue consuming death, terror, and heartbreak. You have the information at your feet. The responsibility now lies in your hands. You decide. And my hope is that you'll decide to go vegan. Thank you.